Hello everyone and welcome to the Biome podcast, and today we're going to be talking to you about sharks, which is very, very exciting. It's going to be a bit of a break from our kind of African ecology, quite heavy theme last time, so we're going to a completely new biome, if you'll forgive the pun. Yeah, that was really awful. Ignore that, it's fine. Anyway, so today we are going to be talking to you about sharks. We're going to do a little bit of what sharks are, and then we're going to go into one of the most interesting things that we've done recently, is looking at the kind of portrayal of sharks in both the media and the public conscience, and it's not something we've really done before with an animal, or at least not so much in this detail. So that's going to be really interesting, seeing how our perception of sharks is going to influence their conservation and how it has influenced our conservation. And once we've kind of dispelled some of the myths that exist around sharks, we'll tell you about why sharks are so valuable for our ecosystem, why we have to protect them, and we're also going to tell you about some of the threats they faced. And we have spoken about this a little bit before with our shark finning episode, but we're going to go into a bit more depth, a bit more nuance this time. And we're also going to then tell you a bit about shark safety and shark management, and hopefully come out with a really nice synthesis of all this information of how we can coexist peacefully with sharks. So Emma is going to take it away and begin. And what are sharks? Let's just kind of, wet the palate. No pun intended. Let's do an overview of sharks.
Yeah, so I mean, probably all of you have seen a shark, at least on TV, social media. That's a big aspect of what we're going to talk about. But overall, sort of sharks are in this group called chondrichthyes, which is your kind of cartilaginous fish. So they have cartilage instead of bones, so they're a lot more flexible. They can move really, really fast in the water, which is kind of what makes them such incredible predators. And just to give you a bit of history of like how long sharks have been around, so they've kind of inhabited the world's oceans for more than 400 million years. So that predates the dinosaurs by 100 million years. So they're pretty old as a group. And very, very varied as well. So people might have heard of a shark, maybe a great white is something that comes to mind. But there are over 500 species of sharks worldwide.
That's a lot of sharks.
It is a lot of sharks. And just incredible diversity of the niches that they occupy. So there's the Portuguese dogfish, there's a species that lives in total darkness and in really deep water, and then you've got the Greenland sharks, which can tolerate really icy waters in the Arctic. So you've got a whole range of species.
Shall we do just do a quick, between the three of us, what is your favourite shark?
Yes.
So my favourite is the Salmon Shark, which is a member of the genus Lamna, and it's a sister species of the porbeagle, which we get over here, but the Salmon Shark is in the northern Pacific, like Alaska and that sort of stuff, and it's like a tiny not tiny, it's about 3 or 4 metres long, but it's like a pocket great white. It's like a great white but squished, and it looks fantastic. It looks. We'll show you a photo here. We'll show you a photo of all of our favourite shark species. This you can see on your screen now is a salmon shark, and I just think that they look like a torpedo.
They're really impressive. That looks so impressive. What about yours, Kate? What's yours?
I think my favourite species of shark is probably the Pyjama Shark.
The what?
It's a shy shark species, and we have them in Cape Town. So they live in the kelp forest, and the reason they're called Pyjama Sharks is because they're stripy. So they have blue stripes, and I've seen them before diving, which is probably why they're my favourite. I'm always biased towards animals that I've seen, but they're just really cool because they're shy sharks, so they're not very big. They're probably vary between about a foot to maybe 2 feet long. And they're just really cool looking. But I have to say, I love great whites.
Who doesn't love a great white?
They're majestic. They're so
nice.
Majestic.
And what about you, Emma?
I have so many that I love, but probably the blue shark.
Okay.
Just think, so this is one on the screen now, so you can see a blue shark, and they're just really elegant, I think, sort of this shimmery kind of blue colour. Almost unnaturally blue.
They remind me a bit of the ballerinas of the shark world.
I like that. I like that. Just very graceful fins, very sort of elongated and elegant. So Yeah.
And you
but they're-
actually get the blue
Yeah.
shark in Britain, don't you?
Yeah. Yeah, you do.
Yeah.
Because there's
Yeah.
actually people. That's one thing people might not realise, that we have that many sharks in British waters, but there are about 21 species that live in British waters all year round, and then you have about 20 more species that sort of come and go. And we were talking about this before between the three of us. The possible that we might get some of these more kind of majestic sharks in UK waters, like the great white, but that's kind of still being investigated. It's not fully clear if we get them or not.
We might do a short little teaser podcast on that, because I think there might be enough material there to make a little podcast about.
Yeah,
Definitely.
And Robi, do you maybe just, I know because you love them, do you want to tell us what the biggest ever shark to have existed was? What is it?
Well, to the best of our knowledge, the biggest ever shark, which recently starred in an awful film starring Jason Statham, was, to give it its full Latin name, Otodus megalodon, which went extinct at the end of the Pliocene around 4 million years ago. In the film, the megalodon is, this, I think it looks like 50 meters long or something ridiculous like that. At the maximum estimate that we have, it was around 15 meters long, so only a little bit bigger than a whale shark. The majority of individuals were about 10 meters long. So you're thinking an animal kind of the size of a whale shark, maybe a bit bigger, and weighing maybe upwards of 40 tons. So it was a really big fish. And recently,
Really big.
it was reclassified into a new genus, Otodus. It used to be Carcharodon, because it was thought that it was a close relative of the great white, which is Carcharodon megalodon. However, and we only know about it because of its teeth, because cartilage doesn't fossilise that well, but actually the similarity between teeth between great whites and megalodon is thought to be convergent evolution. And actually, megalodon would belong to a much more ancient lineage of sharks called Otodontidae. And what's really cool, a megalodon gets a lot of attention, but actually we know from looking at the teeth that it was just the last in a whole chronospecies of very large broad-toothed sharks going back all the way to the Eocene, and there's like a whole sequence of species you can do, and you can look at how the teeth change, get bigger over time. Anyway, complete tangent. You should never have gotten me onto paleontology or prehistory. You knew it was going to happen.
I mean, we had to bring it in somewhere. I think you can't mention sharks without bringing in this impressive, massive, and you look up the teeth. They are absolutely huge and very impressive. So I think maybe that gives you a bit of an overview that sharks are very diverse, lots and lots of different species, and they also have sort of different behaviours, morphologies, that kind of thing as well. So the majority of sharks give birth to live young, so they are viviparous, but then some of them are oviparous, which means that they lay eggs, and most of them, I don't know, have you guys seen shark eggs? I haven't, but
Yeah,
it's
you see them on the
the
beach.
cases.
I think we did
Yeah,
see
they're
them,
so
Emma, in
cool.
Dale Fort. Don't you? They're like mermaids' purses, and they're these
Oh,
little...
maybe we did.
they have
I
like-
just, yeah.
It almost looks like a wire attached to them,
Yeah.
like a cable, like on our headphones, attached, and it sort of spirals out. I've actually seen them in the sea before. It's really cool.
That's cool. Okay, well, you've one-upped us there. I thought we were lucky with
sorry.
eggs washed up on a Welsh beach, but...
No,
See
but
my
I'd
little
love to
pyjama
see more of
shark
them. They just
eggs.
look... Oh, that'd be amazing. So yeah, do you want to maybe talk through a little bit of like a brief history of where this kind of human-shark conflict side of things comes from, Kate?
Yeah, so the kind of conflict we're going to focus on in this episode is relating to shark bite incidents. So incidents where sharks have bitten people. To give a bit of context about kind of how often this happens, in 2020, so last year, there were 57 unprovoked shark bites worldwide and 39 provoked shark bites. And just some definitions there. An unprovoked shark bite is defined as a shark bite that occurs in the shark's natural environment where the shark has not been antagonized by the person that it bites. So this is typically swimmers and surfers who are just minding their own business, don't know the shark is there, and then unfortunately get bitten. Whereas a provoked shark bite is when the human initiates an interaction with the shark in some ways, which then leads to the shark biting them. So examples of this include, but are not really limited to, divers trying to touch a shark, spearfishermen being bitten, or spearfisher women, people attempting to feed sharks, or if the shark is entangled in fishing equipment, and the people tried to remove the shark from the fishing equipment, and they end up being bitten. 2020 was obviously a super weird year for pretty much everyone. So just to clarify that, if in case you're thinking those numbers are probably lower because there were less people going to the beach, less people on holiday, it was actually pretty standard in terms of the trends we've been seeing in shark bites. So in 2019, there were 64 unprovoked shark bites and 41 provoked. In 2018, there were 62 unprovoked shark bites, and the past 5 years average was 82, but we have been seeing this downward trend. So 2020 actually fits in quite well with the trends we've been seeing. It's just slightly lower than what we've had in previous years.
That's really interesting. So that provides like a really nice footprint, baseline, something like that, in your head to bear in mind as we go through the next part of the podcast. So what I'm going to do now, everyone kind of has this idea of sharks in their head, and I assume the majority of people kind of have them in their head as the bad guys. You know, Jaws and Finding Nemo and Meg and all of these things. We have this perception of sharks in the media as quite ferocious killing machines. That's something that always comes up, especially in American media. Killing machine, the perfect killing machine, which is kind of nonsense. But yeah, what I'm going to do now is kind of take you through a timeline in chronological order of how this image of sharks developed, how our public perception of sharks as the bad guys changed over the course of the last century. And hopefully that'll give you an appreciation of how they're quite undeserving, in fact entirely undeserving in my opinion, of this reputation. And I'm also going to lay out a bit of how this negative reputation is actually affecting them far more than it's affecting us. So the whole kind of story begins in 1916 with the Jersey Shore shark incidents, or as they were marketed at the time, the Jersey Shore shark attacks. And so in a relatively small amount of coast on the eastern seaboard, over the course of a few days, I think 12 days, 4 people were killed and 1 were injured by a series of shark bites. These incidents drew national reaction. It was very much one of those mass hysteria moments that were quite common at the round of the turn of the century. And they spawned a wave of national panic, and that culminated in a very deadly wave of shark hunts, with an estimated 250 large sharks in the area being killed. And this is really interesting because this is the moment where human and shark media interaction begins. It's very interesting that prior to this incident, the word shark attack the phrase shark attack didn't really exist quite so much. Interactions prior to this were characterized as shark accidents or shark incidents or, shark bites. But the term attack implies intent, and it implies assignment of blame on the animal. And that didn't really exist in cultural perception until this spate of attacks.
But I think that word changes a lot of things. If you just think about what that word means in your head, it's quite something that's quite terrifying. It's something that's provoked, and that probably explains a lot with that wording.
The other pervasive trope that came out of the Jersey Shore attacks is the origin of a rogue shark, which essentially a rogue shark is a single animal which, for whatever reason, is actively targeting humans with predatory intent, malicious intent. And this kind of trope was originated by Frederick Lucas and John Treadwell from the American Museum of Natural History. And they blamed it on a single great white, a young great white, which was caught in the area with human remains in its stomach. But it kind of falls flat. A rogue shark doesn't actually exist. So not only is the culpability of this one great white shark quite unlikely, considering a fair few of the incidents happened in a estuarine creek, therefore probably implicating at least one bull shark in the incidents, the species at fault is kind of a moot point, because rogue sharks don't exist. These very tragic losses of life are not due to unusual behaviour on the part of the shark. They can be pretty conclusively linked to unusual behaviour They can be pretty conclusively linked to unusual behaviour on the part of people. So at the time that it happened, there was a polio epidemic in that part of the United States and a summer heat wave, all of which drove people to much higher quantities to the seashore. And in the kind of estuarine environment where it happened, a lunar cycle meant that the tide had come in incredibly high, so the water was twice as salty as it is normally. So really, all this panic ensued, but it wasn't actually any unusual behaviour on the part of the shark. It was a complex interaction of human factors and environmental causes. But yeah, the 1916 Jersey Shore attacks, or really incidents, were the first in the line of kind of big shark incidents which cemented this image we have of sharks in our head.
I think this incident was quite the turning point in terms of our relationship with sharks, as you've just sort of outlined, because it's very reasonable that people would have been scared and freaked out if 4 people were killed in the space of 12 days. I think that's, if I was on holiday somewhere and that happened, I would, you know, I'm, you know, someone who has studied sharks and knows the risks are incredibly low and stuff, but I think it's very reasonable to be scared by that. I think what's really unfortunate about this was it changed the way we talk about sharks and the kind of terms that came out of it, attack and rogue. These are such negative words. And because they came off the back of an incredibly emotional time, which is very understandable and is obviously tragic, because they were so emotionally fueled, they've stuck for such a long time. And the term shark attack is still so commonly used, even in scientific literature sometimes. And it's just such a shame. And there's a big push to move away from it, which is why we've sort of been saying shark bite incidents, because that's what they are.
Yeah. And there were 2 more events in the 19th century which kind of helped to solidify this image.
20th century.
Both of them happened during the Second World War. 20th century. Oh my god, I always get that wrong.
Sure.
Both of them happened during
it's confusing.
Both of them happened during the Second World War, and involved torpedoing of ships. One of which was the USS Indianapolis in 1945, which was torpedoed in the Pacific by a Japanese submarine. And the incident is billed or marketed as the worst shark attack in history, which is interesting. So let's unpack that a bit. And it is true that it was the single greatest loss of life at sea from a single ship in the history of the US Navy. That is true. But contemporary analysis reveals that the vast majority of sailors who died did so by the usual means of people who die at sea, namely drowning and dehydration, as well as other things like hypernatremia, hypothermia, and hallucinations. The scale of shark involvement has been grossly exaggerated. It was likely, and indeed there are lots of reliable witnesses, that there are at least some predation events, notably by, well, it's thought, oceanic white-tip sharks, which are not a shark which is quite often implicated in these sorts of things. But the vast majority of shark interaction in that event was scavenging of drowned bodies and probably just responding to a lot of disturbance in the water. So, again, cementing the image of sharks as indiscriminate killers in the psyche, but actually, again, it's anthropogenic behaviour which is causing this. The sharks aren't doing anything unusual. They're responding naturally in the way that all living organisms, in particular carnivores, do to a briefly abundant food supply. And it's not a random, thoughtless act of malice, but it's what happens when you get a sudden abundance of food, and largely due to anthropogenic factors, and the sharks responded to that. The exact same can be said of the sinking of the RMS Nova Scotia, again implicating oceanic whitetips, again far an exaggerated role for these sharks, and likely a much smaller death count likely a much smaller death count than is attributed to them. And then we get to Jaws in 1975.
I feel like this changed a lot.
Yes. I'm sure most people have seen Jaws. It was actually partly inspired by the Jersey Shore's attacks. I'm not going to, to save time, I'm not going to tell you what happens in Jaws. I'm sure we all know or have all heard. But I actually want to tell you a little bit about how Jaws impacted the human psyche. So the studio that produced Jaws went so far as to spend $1 million on a marketing campaign to create what they called a culture of Jaws, a fear of Jaws in the public using radio and television. And what they did was they kind of added sharks to the horror genre. They very deliberately tried to make people scared of sharks, and therefore they could build Jaws as a horror movie and cash in on it. So it was a very deliberate ploy and wildly successful in terms of economic, for the studio. Jaws is incredibly successful. And the descriptions of the shark in the movie are very telling. So I'll read a couple out here. The shark is stated to move and act without passion and logic, as if God created the devil and gave him jaws. None of man's fantasies of evil can compare with the reality, which is impressive, to say the least.
I feel like with Jaws, it's probably, like you mentioned, the build-up of all these events that had happened previously. In a way, from a marketing perspective, it was probably the best time that they could instill fear into people, because
Absolutely.
be like, oh, look what happened with the Nova Scotia attacks and the previous attacks. Like, it was all sharks and they were to blame. It's very clever, but not in a good way for sharks.
They capitalised on tragedy, which is really problematic. And it's when you read these descriptions of sharks, it's just almost insulting. It's like, if you've ever seen a shark, even in an aquarium, these descriptions are just so inaccurate.
Yeah.
But a lot of people at the time would never have seen a shark.
My favourite one is sharks are like axe murderers. There's something crazy, evil, and uncontrollable about them, which is...
That's just complete rubbish, isn't it, though?
I mean, I've never met an axe murderer, but I have met a shark. And I'm still here.
They were able to kind of create their own narrative because majority of people wouldn't have had interactions with sharks at the time. And the sad thing about it is it's just so hard to undo.
And the key thing that makes Jaws as an act of fiction different from all the actual tragedies with shark encounters that have occurred is kind of two things, really. One, Jaws actually had legislative impact, which was that in the fallout, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration in the States declared sharks to be waste fish, which essentially allowed all commercial fishing on all species of sharks, allowing for culling and shark derbies. And actually, the really interesting thing about Jaws is that they added a message. Not only did they have this message of sharks are indiscriminate killers, they added a message that killing sharks is good, and killing sharks will save human lives. And that was the clincher. That's what makes Jaws, as a work of fiction, actually different from the Jersey Shore attacks and USS Indianapolis, because it could mass produce this message: killing sharks is good.
I hadn't realised the legislation changed. That's shocking. That is where it originated. Wow.
And there's one more, just to bring it into, to round up this story, this timeline, one more event in the kind of shark maligning story, which people might probably remember. So it happened in Sharm el-Sheikh in the Red Sea in 2010. An oceanic white-tip shark was implicated in several bites on tourists. And I think it led to 2 deaths. I'm not entirely sure. And so again, this was the subject of a media frenzy. Shark attack was on everywhere. And again, the theory of a rogue shark came up. But with the benefit of hindsight, if we actually look at what happened, it becomes quite evident that a single shark was responsible. This is entirely possible. But it was actually a shark that had been conditioned to be hand-fed by unscrupulous dive instructors. And so it began to associate divers' waists, where they held their kind of fanny packs, where they'd keep the fish to lure the sharks in, with food. And so when that stopped and it was driven closer to the shore, it then saw divers and swimmers and targeted the same places in an attempt to get an easy meal. So again, this is not a random, thoughtless, eye is as cold as death like an axe murderer animal. This is an animal which has been conditioned through human behaviour to act in a certain way and is really responding in an entirely natural way. You'd get the same effect with a lion, you'd get the same effect with an elephant. It's not unique to sharks, is the take-home message here. And then finally, Shark Week. As I'm sure most of us have watched. I've watched a couple of Shark Week documentaries before. And it's really the modern incarnation of Jaws, and it's kind of doing the same damage. So it's an annual week-long TV programming event hosted by Discovery Channel. And And originally it was quite heavily involved in shark conservation and, you know, dispelling myths. But recently it's been quite heavily involved in docufiction. The very famous Megalodon, the Monster Shark Lives mockumentary caused a lot of controversy. But really, the trouble with Shark Week is the sensationalization of sharks. So just to read out a few of the titles of the programs they put out. Great White Kill Zone and Capsized, Blood in the Water, Shark of Darkness, Wrath of the Submarine. It's all kind of ridiculous. But this is a modern example of how sensationalist media can perpetrate this really harmful kind of image that we're giving to sharks.
But I think something like Discovery Channel is kind of almost, you would have thought that it was more their role to have a conservation message rather than this. But when we were researching this and I was trying to watch some documentaries, almost from within the first 5 seconds I could tell whether it was going to be a legit documentary or not, because if it starts off with all this like really spooky kind of horror music, I'm like, they're going to victimize sharks, aren't they? And then you watch through it and they're like, bloodthirsty killer, and I'm like, okay, it's one of these.
So yeah, I hope that timeline has been useful so you can kind of understand how this image that we have in society of sharks as these mindless killers has built up. But looking critically back, and with an understanding of shark behaviour at all of these events, we can draw some conclusions. Number one, rogue sharks do not exist. It's not a phenomenon observed in nature. Sharks are no more violent, dangerous and aggressive than any other large carnivore, like a lion or a tiger or a crocodile. I'd much rather get in the water with a shark than a crocodile, for the record. And
yeah, me too.
Yeah, and really the take-home message is any increase in shark bites, any sensationalized shark incidents tend to correlate much more with human action and human anthropogenic environmental action than with what the sharks are doing. Everyone says you're more likely to get struck by lightning than by killed by a shark, which is absolutely true. The risk of death from a shark bite is 1 in 3,748.
Do you want me to say that?
3,000, 7,000. You know what? It's bigger.
It's well, the risk of dying from a shark bite is 1 in 3,700,000, whereas the risk of dying through being struck by lightning is 1 in 79,746. So you are 47 times more likely to die being struck by lightning than be killed by a shark. And when you compare this to other risks, you've got a 1 in 7 chance of dying from cancer, 1 in 5 chance from heart disease, and most importantly, a 1 in 1,134 chance of dying from drowning. So by a massive order of magnitude, when you go in the ocean, you are much more likely to drown than you are to be killed by a shark.
And I think what's a nice kind of little corollary to bring in there, people might think, well, why? Why is that the case when sharks are clearly at the top of the food chain? Even if they're not mindless predators, they are at the top of the food chain. They're big animals, they're big predators. And it's actually, the reason for this is because the vast majority of shark bites are not predatory events. They're not trying to kill you and consume you. For instance, I'm sure you've all seen Blue Planet or Planet Earth, where the great white shark literally jumps out of the water to get the seal.
That's such an amazing footage, that
I know,
scene.
I'd love to introduce it. But there has, and this is just talking about great whites here, there has never been a recorded incidence of a great white shark breach attacking a human. And so it's also very common to say, oh, well, it's a case of mistaken identity. They thought you were a seal or a turtle because, you know, a person on a surfboard looks a bit similar. And that theory has actually been somewhat debunked recently. So there are kind of only really 2 scenarios under which conditions you might get bitten by a shark. And in one of these is unfavourable water conditions or curiosity. And these would lead to a test bite. So sharks are incredibly sensitive animals. They've got fantastic vision, fantastic noses, and all of their electroreceptive equipment essentially converges on the nose. They also don't have hands. And so if you're a carnivorous animal interacting with your environment, you interact through your head. And so in poor water conditions, or if they're curious and have never seen a person before, the majority of sharks will, circle, get a glimpse and then go away. But if, for example, their vision is obscured by poor water, they might come and do a test bite. which is their way of interacting with the environment and testing what this strange mammalian thing in their environment is. And the majority of these bites aren't fatal, and we know this because the vast majority of people survive. As anyone who's seen Planet Earth, a great white hunting a seal would know, if it wanted to be a fatal thing, you'd know about it and you probably wouldn't get away from it. But these are just exploratory bites, and this is why most people survive. Unfortunately, if the shark weighs a couple of tons and is 7 meters long, an exploratory bite might take your leg off and you might die. That's an artifact of us being very poorly suited to the marine environment. It's not an artifact of sharks trying to attack us.
I think that's a point to mention as well. This is, like we mentioned, they've been around for 400 million years in the oceans. This is very much their habitat. It's humans that are now, like you were saying, Kate, before, more trips to the ocean, more people swimming in the sea. It's not our natural environment. That's theirs. It's kind of, who could blame them if they're being curious? Exactly.
Yeah. And the second kind of combination of activities which might lead to a negative encounter with a shark is anthropogenic. You know, a polio epidemic, a heat wave. In Sharm el-Sheikh, there was an implication that people had been dumping animal carcasses in the water, hand-feeding sharks, getting them used to being around humans. If a shark bite occurs under these scenarios, it's absolutely an anthropogenic caused behaviour. It's not a rogue shark. The shark is not at fault in this scenario. Its behaviour, at least, is not at fault. And, you know, if sharks didn't eat meat, we'd think they were the most beautiful animals in the seas. And the really great tragedy here is that only 4 species have, you know, pose any threat whatsoever to humans. The great white, the bull shark, the tiger shark, and the oceanic white tip. And yet more than 400 species of sharks in the world have got this negative reputation. So that's where I'll kind of sum up. That's the timeline. I know I've talked a lot. This is going to be kind of a little bit of a monologue episode.
Another point of unusual anthropogenic activity is that with increasing human populations, it's sort of inevitable we're going to see an increase in shark bite incidences just because of the laws of probability. So much so that a study in Florida actually identified shark bite hotspots based on beach attendance rather than based on kind of anything to do with the shark, which I think is worth noting, as you've kind of made the point that this human shark conflict is as much about humans as it is about sharks. And I think that's why shark conservation is a really interesting world to be in, because it's a good candidate for kind of interdisciplinary research, and it sort of really highlights why interdisciplinary research is needed in conservation. Because if you went and took a pure ecology standpoint to conserve sharks, you would miss out a key habitat in which shark conservation decisions are made, which is the beach, where you're never going to find a shark on the beach, but what happens on the beach has massive implications for what happens to shark conservation.
That's a really nice point. I really like the kind of interlinking of different disciplines there. So yeah, hopefully that's kind of giving you a nice idea of why, well, not a nice idea, a pretty grim idea of why we think of sharks as we do. But next, it's probably worth talking about the threats that we in turn pose to sharks.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's something that's been said, which I quite like the way someone said this, is kind of we should be afraid for sharks rather than of them. Like, there's very much, like you just mentioned, Robi, the encroachment kind of of humans on their habitat is kind of causing these shark bite incidents, which are deemed attacks and murderous and all those words that you just said. But today, kind of in modern society, humans are killing 100 million sharks each year. And this is 70% of that is thought to be for shark fin soup, which is, you can listen to more about that. We talked about in our shark finning episode, but something that's deemed very, very valuable in kind of Asian cuisine with a lot of cultural background to that. But then you've also got massive amounts of habitat destruction, sort of just a degradation of our oceans in general. And think about commercial fishing. The scale at which we commercially fish now is, I hate using this word because everyone uses it all the time, but unprecedented. It's just like on such a big scale. And you've now got an issue with not only catching them deliberately for the fins, but you've also got a massive issue with them being caught as bycatch. So this is when nets are used, and they're not intended for sharks, but let's be real, if you dump a massive trawler net in the ocean and just leave it, and it's going to capture unintended species like sharks. So I think, I mean, just to give you that number again, it's 100 million sharks that we are killing every single year. And when you think back to the numbers that you just said, Robi, that is so much larger than if you flip it of how many humans are dying as a result of sharks. It's negligible.
100 million to 67 attacks, not even deaths.
Yeah,
I mean, that can't compare in any metric.
No, it's just, yeah. I find that quite shocking. I think just how many of them we are taking and how many we're killing, but we're so quick to demonize them and blame them for any incidents that happen in the ocean. They're like, oh, it must be sharks because they're these aggressive killers.
Yeah, and again, completely ignoring the fact that if you are bitten by a shark, you're likely to survive it. The number of shark attacks compared to the number of shark deaths each year is, again, also ridiculous.
Yeah. So I guess, I mean, also talking about their threats, I think it's important to talk about their role within the ecosystem as these big apex predators. Because whenever you have big predators, and they're not just apex predators, they're also keystone species, they are vital to managing and maintaining healthy ocean ecosystems. So if you think about it, you've got something at the very top of the food chain, they'll be feeding on animals below them, which then feed on smaller animals. It's this massive food web that they're basically in control of. And so we've talked about this in various podcasts. It's not only that they're managing numbers of prey through direct consumption, but it's also this thing of this ecology of fear, where just their presence in a particular area of the ocean changes the distribution of their prey and causes intimidation of prey, so it kind of keeps them moving throughout the ocean and prevents them from aggregating in a small area.
So a bit like what we've been talking about with lynxes and wolves and why we should bring them back to the UK, you're saying sharks have a similar impact in the ocean.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and in a very similar to way as like the species we mentioned, the other terrestrial predators. Sort of sharks are important for taking out the sick or the injured, or like removing weaker individuals from a population, because that's all part of evolution by natural selection. If you can survive, you're fit, you're strong, you can swim really quickly, you're more likely to be able to escape in a shark, whereas if you've got a dodgy fin and you kind of can't swim, you're probably going to be eaten. But I guess maybe we could talk about a couple like interesting examples, like really where specifically sharks are having a positive effect on ecosystems. So you've got an interesting sort of interaction with tiger sharks and seagrass.
How does that? Not quite sure how that. Tell me, enlighten me. Tell me about tiger sharks and seagrass.
So yeah, I was trying to get my head around this because it's not obviously when you think of it a direct impact, it's indirect. So tiger sharks found in different parts around the world, but this was an example in Shark Bay, Australia. So in this area, you've got dugongs and green sea turtles, which are feeding on the seagrass, and these are common prey for tiger sharks. So if you don't have tiger sharks in the area, these dugongs and sea turtles could just graze endlessly, eat all the seagrass they want, and basically decimate these seagrass areas, which are vital ecosystems for the mitigation of global warming and things like that. They're really, really important uptakers of carbon dioxide. And so if you have tiger sharks, what this does through this ecology of fear thing that we've talked about before is that it keeps the dugongs and the sea turtles moving so that they graze all parts of the seagrass, not just the most nutritious areas. And then that means the seagrass ecosystem as a whole is maintained.
That's so cool. So they're a bit like the wolves in Yellowstone almost.
I was about to say that exact same thing. I was like, this is an underwater wolves in Yellowstone.
That's so cool. And absolutely.
And what's nice
about that is tiger sharks are one of the ones we perceive as one of the big threats to people. So I love that you've chosen that example, because actually we can't live without the tiger sharks, guys. This is great.
And tiger sharks get such a bad rep because they eat turtles, and people have seen the clips of them eating turtles. I think it's been in A Planet Earth, or definitely in something David Attenborough's done. And we love turtles. We think of turtles as cute and cuddly. And so tiger sharks have been so demonised for it. So I think people think of them as like a particularly scary and mean species of shark because they eat everything.
Also, it sounds scary, doesn't it?
It does,
Tiger,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, you're combining two kind of apex predators in one name. But that's what apex predators do.
And also, I think, like, as conservationists, it's also important to think about the role which ecosystems provide and not just the species. So seagrass meadows, I think they're called meadows if they're on the ground, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think they are.
So the seagrass, okay, I'll go with that. I'll say, so seagrass meadows as well as mangroves are sort of some of the best allies we have, as well as forests on land and rainforests and things like that in the fight against climate change. So if we just yes, I love sea turtles and I love dugongs, but like if we just let them decimate seagrass so that there's none left, it's very hard to get that back.
That's a really interesting point. Sharks are then therefore our ally in fighting climate change.
I'm going to get that on a t-shirt.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's what we should be marketing.
That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get some t-shirts printed for everyone at Biome Products. Sharks are our allies against global climate change.
Yes. Ask us why.
So, Robi, how much do you love tea?
Can I quantify? I love tea a lot, as much as I love, Pine Martins.
Exactly, me too. I love tea, and that's really lucky we do, because this episode is actually being sponsored by the amazing tea company called Animal Tea.
Ooh.
And they make sustainable, organic, pesticide-free loose tea.
All of my favourite things.
Exactly, and what's more, it tastes really, really good. And do you want to know the best part of Animal Tea?
I would have thought the best part is that it's sustainable, organic, pesticide-free, but there's more. Tell me more.
There is more. They give away 100% of their profits to wildlife charities to support species like pangolins, lions, and primates.
So where can I get more? Because I will be drinking lots and lots.
Yeah, so if you want more tea, Robi, or anyone listening wants some tea, so you just head to the website animaltea.com. So that's ANIMALL and then TEA.com to place an order. And what's more is that you, as Biome Podcast listeners, get 15% off the total order by entering the code Biome. So that's BIOME at the checkout. So if you use our Biome code, you can order some of this incredible tea and join me and Robi on our tea drinking adventure.
Our tea journey.
Exactly. So go out and drink tea, and we're going to head back to the podcast now.
See you next time.
Oh my god, yes, love it. And so then I guess while we're talking about ecosystems that are really, really important, sharks also play a vital role in managing coral reefs. So you've probably all seen this, any of the big Attenborough ones recently, or loads of stuff on Netflix even. Coral reefs are in trouble. And a big reason for that is climate change with warming temperatures and also increased acidification in our oceans. You've got coral bleaching on a scale that we've never seen in human history before, and we face losing the majority of coral reefs in the next few decades if we don't do anything about it. So sharks, let's talk about sharks, because they could also be really, really important allies for coral reefs as well. Can we add that to the t-shirt?
We can add that to the t-shirt.
Yeah.
I'm writing it down. I'm writing a list. All the things we want on our t-shirt.
Super. So say if you have things, you've got reef sharks, a variety of different species, and so what they're doing is basically keeping a balance in the fish communities that live on reefs. So really, really important fish species for reefs are these herbivorous fish that basically they graze at the algae, and this. So okay, let me explain this a little bit better. So things like macroalgae will compete with coral to settle on the reef. So if you just let a coral reef be taken over by algae, corals won't have anywhere to settle. So you need these herbivorous fish which graze on the algae and allow the coral to thrive. So if you have sharks, you have a control of the fish species that then feed on the herbivorous fish. Whereas if you take the sharks away and then you've suddenly got a massive increase in these slightly larger fish, they're going to then eat lots of these smaller herbivorous fish, and then there will no longer be these grazers that can graze on the algae and allow the coral to grow.
So those middle fish, would that be something like groupers, which you see quite a lot on reefs? So those are the kind of middle tier stuff you're after?
Yeah, it's something like that. And actually there's been, in Jamaica, they've seen this, where there's been a loss of sharks. This has basically caused a shift from coral to an algae-dominated system. So it's actually something that's been seen to happen. So yeah, I think sharks are vitally important in that regard as well.
And it's interesting you said that again, that word unprecedented for coral reef bleaching and this and the dying off of the coral reefs. It's really interesting if you look into the fossil record. This isn't something that we're just making up, and we know that this is happening now because it has happened before. So after every mass extinction, when the oceans, at the end of the Oligocene, there was a big ocean shift and all the currents changed. And also when the Tethys Sea closed, when Africa and India and kind of went up and hit Eurasia, entire ecosystems of corals, entire kind of families of corals went extinct. And so our modern corals are actually comparatively young. Sharks have been around a lot longer than the current corals have, which is an interesting parallel. But we know that corals are particularly easily threatened systems, and I think there are about 80 different whole families of coral species which have gone extinct at different parts of history because of either a shift in the ocean ecosystem. Maybe the sharks went extinct in that area and then that happened, or coral bleaching because of the ocean current shifting. So we know that corals are at risk, and so we can't afford to. We know they're at risk from climate change. We know they're at risk in the past. We can't afford to let the sharks go either. Like, they're one of the last key bits in the coral ecosystem.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think there's so many other effects. So we'll put some links if you want to look a bit more into the effects that sharks have on ecosystems. They're very extensive.
I think all this stuff you've been saying about sharks and the ecosystem is so important and so interesting as well. And it you can kind of see that typical sort of linear ecosystem you're taught in school, where you've got your predator and then your herbivore and then your vegetation, but you've kind of got the groupers, so there's sort of mesopredators in there as well. And I think something that we learn when we're so young and we often forget is that the further down that line you go, the more abundant that species is. So apex predators are naturally have smaller populations, because if you had too many of them, nothing else would be able to survive. So sharks are already at a disadvantage because they're naturally lower in population. And disadvantage is the wrong word actually, because that's their natural state. They're not disadvantaged. But in terms of this killing that we're doing towards sharks, we're killing off a predator that's already going to have a naturally lower population size, smaller than the mesopredators, the groupers below them. So we're allowing that explosion to happen, which is really damaging. And we sort of forget that really basic stuff we're taught in primary school. So it's really interesting to hear these examples, and that was what was going through my head.
And it's also nice that we're coming to realise that, we're taught, again, we're kind of taught in primary school that ecosystem regulation is bottom up. You don't really bother saving the tigers, you just need to save the trees, and then the trees will save the antelopes, and the antelopes will save the tigers, and the same with the sharks. But actually, as we lose species, we come to realise, and especially as we lose the big predators, we realise actually just as much ecosystem control is top down. The sharks control the groupers control the herbivorous fish help the corals, and it goes both ways. And I think it's good that we're understanding that now. It's a shame that we had to lose so much to clock that, but at least that's now something we realise.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think maybe people underestimate the role that predators play in ecosystems. So I think, that's just a handful of services that sharks are providing in ecosystems. There are many, many more. They have extensive benefits to a variety of habitats. So we'll provide some links to papers and things like that if you want to check those out. But maybe now we should move on and sort of talk about like shark safety management. What strategies are being used to control sharks?
Yeah, sure. So as much as we clearly believe sharks are incredibly important, and they are, that's not to say that, shark bite incidents are fine. We don't want people to be bitten by sharks. I think that's a given for anyone, no matter where you stand on how that should be managed. And there's kind of 3 approaches to dealing with this. And the first one is lethal shark control. The second one is non-lethal shark control. And the third one is to do nothing.
Does that count as an approach?
I think so. I think that's a decision that you made. You sort of decided we're going to do nothing about this. So in terms of lethal shark control, that has historically been what we've opted for since the kind of turn of the century in the 1900s. And the kind of most common method of this is so-called shark nets. And these are nets that stretch across the coastline, commonly along popular surfing or swimming beaches. Now, a lot of people think that these nets form a barrier to sharks, and they are designed to enclose an area of swimming as a sort of safe zone and keep the sharks out in the open ocean. This common misconception is completely false.
I have that misconception. Is that not what shark nets do?
No, I used to
goodness.
as well.
Wait,
that's not at all what they are.
What do they do then?
So shark nets are actually gill nets, which are a commonly used fishing device, and they are designed specifically to catch and kill large sharks.
Really?
Yeah. So they're.
I haven't read this part of the document. Is that actually true? I thought it was like a net, which meant you can swim because they can't get through the net.
No. So
the
majority of shark nets around the world are gill nets.
So they're designed to be lethal.
Yeah. So they've got the kind of netting is large squares, so they're designed to entangle larger sharks, and the idea behind it is to lower the population, decrease the population of sharks in the area, which lowers the probability of encountering a shark and thus lowers the probability of being bitten. The irony, the kind of horrible irony, is that they don't form a barrier to sharks at all. Even though they're designed to catch sharks, they're also not forming a barrier. They do not extend across the whole water column, so sharks could swim above them, below them, and
that just
between
seems
them.
really flawed.
Really flawed.
I feel like I've been lied to.
You have.
But who do I tell? I'm angry about this.
Well, this is the thing. Actually, the information is there when you look for it. The majority of councils or local authorities operating shark nets, it's available online. They're not lying about it, but they're not forthcoming with the truth either. So you almost have to know in order to find out, because you have to be deliberately looking for it, if that makes sense.
I'm actually quite shocked. So that I feel, oh my god.
Yeah.
So hang on, you're swimming in a beach and there's just dead sharks hanging on a net near you.
Well, this is the thing. And so places that use these include Australia, parts of South Africa, I think some places in the Caribbean.
I know bits of India do. India and Sri Lanka do.
Parts of India, Sri Lanka. And the area in South Africa that uses them is in KwaZulu-Natal, so on the east coast, on the Indian Ocean side. And there, a third of the sharks caught in the nets are actually caught on the shore side. So they are entangled as they're swimming away from the beach and back out to sea is when they get caught in the net. So not only do these nets not form a barrier, they're actually catching sharks that are swimming away from people and therefore not presenting an immediate threat.
So is there any why would we use these shark nets then? Are they effective? Is there any?
I think they kill a lot of sharks. The reason, I think it's hard because in some places where they have been installed, shark bite incidents have gone down. Whether you can directly say that's because of the nets, I think is almost, we can't really definitively say that that's why. the big problem with these nets is that they're not selective, and many other marine creatures are caught in the nets, including turtles, whales, dolphins, and other non-dangerous species of shark. I think lethal control has been favoured because it does make people feel better. I think the idea of a barrier makes people feel even better. So the shark nets kind of tick both boxes because they kind of trick people into thinking that they're in an enclosed, safe space, and they're also, killing sharks, which makes people feel better.
And I guess there's a slight paradox in that the thing about shark nets is you can see the results. You can drag out a load of dead sharks and say, we saved lives. Look, these sharks aren't going to be biting anyone because they're dead. But actually, a lot of the time, it's a bit like that thing with revolutions when people say, oh, you've never seen a peaceful revolution. Like, yes, you haven't, because the peaceful revolutions didn't happen because democratic change happened naturally. That's the whole point. So it's quite a hard thing to get your head around, but I guess I really try. I've got it in my head, but I can't actually say it. I guess maybe shark nets are favoured because you can actually see the results, whereas non-lethal management, you might not see the results, and all you'd see is living sharks and not bitten people, and so people would still be afraid they're going to be bitten by the sharks, even though they're not being bitten. So it's a bit of a... Okay, that made sense in my head. I don't know if... We'll see if the viewers... Do you know what I mean?
It does make sense, especially because the aim of the nets is to... It's all about probability. They're saying, if we kill all these sharks, then the probability of being bitten by a shark goes down, even though, as we've discussed earlier, the probability is 1 in 3.7 million. So... It's not literally that on every single beach in the world, but it's already low, and they're trying to make it even smaller. An alternative to shark nets, but still a lethal form of shark control, are things called drumlines, which are basically a baited hook attached to a buoy, and they are designed to attract sharks that are actively hunting. They are slightly ecologically better than a shark net because they are targeted. So they are going to be targeting carnivores because it's a bait, and they're designed specifically for large and sort of dangerous sharks. Dangerous in inverted commas for anyone listening on Spotify.
Oh, I haven't been clarifying that because I've been used to doing that a lot. So a quick question: if they attract sharks which are actively hunting, surely, as any good predator does, it will take advantage of an easy, low-risk food source if it comes across it. So surely it'll just take any big shark that comes along, actively hunting or not.
Yes, yeah, I think so. I think the whole idea of it attracting someone actively hunting is a bit questionable because, what kind of... It's not... If you're not hunting, it's not like you just swim past. They're not like people who have scheduled meal times.
Yeah.
They would just... they'd be opportunistic and take it. But it's designed for, carnivorous sharks. And in KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa, the Sharks Board there, they have said that their data suggests the capture of non-target species did decline by 47.5% following the installation of drumlines. So they're currently using a combination of nets and drumlines, whereas before they were just using nets. So they swapped out a bunch of their nets for drumlines and saw a pretty heavy decline in the capture of non-target species. And this is an area of high biodiversity, so that is good.
Although I suppose you could probably say maybe that decline is due to the fact that you've killed all those non-target species on your nets. So I'm just playing the devil's avocado here. Yeah,
and it's one of those things that's like, okay, that's better. It's still not. You're still killing sharks. But okay, good that you're not now killing whales and dolphins and turtles and birds. The last kind of typical lethal form of shark control are the shark hunts that Robi, you mentioned earlier. I would argue that shark hunts are largely a form of theatre aimed to control fear rather than actually control shark risk. Because, as you said, the likelihood of finding the shark is slim, and I feel like these hunts play on the emotional response to shark bites and road shark theory, suggesting that if a shark bit one human, that they might bite another and get a sort of taste for human flesh, when we have just no evidence to support that happening.
I mean, I feel one interesting point there, because obviously, like we've been talking about with the rogue shark theory, that there is very little evidence to back that up. But I found, so there was this paper by Kluwer et al., which was conducted in 2018. And they were basically arguing that if you individually profile sharks, that you would be able to identify ones which are more aggressive. Because if you think about it, even in people, in dogs, it's the whole idea behind domestication. There are some individuals which are more aggressive than others. And in the process of domestication, we selected the more tame individuals for our own purpose. So their idea behind this study is that if they could reduce these problem individuals through, a variety of really interesting kind of new technologies coming out, so like acoustic tagging, satellite tagging, like underwater photo identification, forensic analysis, like this whole combination of study skills, basically, that they would be able to identify individual more aggressive sharks. But then I was kind of a bit conflicted, because then it's like, well, surely we've just talked about that the rogue shark idea doesn't really hold up. But like, what do you guys think about that? Like, could there just be some more aggressive individuals? Because we see that in the animal kingdom.
Well, with great whites, young juvenile male great white sharks tend to be more aggressive. That's obviously does not hold true of all great whites ever, but that is a sort of trend that we see. So I think if we started doing those types of analysis, it would be more often than not juvenile males coming up, and we can't then just target juvenile males, because then we'd have an unbalanced population. I don't know if that would be the same for the other species of shark, but I do worry that those types of trends would come up as well, that you'd see, okay, it tends to be one sex over another, one age group over another, rather than purely personality based.
I think perhaps an important thing to mention with rogue shark theory is that it kind of assumes that after a certain taste for flesh, for whatever reason, again, if you're listening in Spotify, that was the fingers, the bunnies. After a certain taste of flesh, a shark might actively seek out humans as prey. It doesn't make any kind of assumption on its personality. We know that sharks do display some form of personality. Any shark researcher will tell you that, yeah, there are some sharks I'm really chill with, they just circle around. Then there's other sharks which come in and I think, right, I've got to back off because he's always going to be a bit grumpy. I know Ocean Ramsey, the quite famous kind of social media marine scientist, she used social media a lot, of Hawaii, knows a lot and knows sharks by personality and sight. So it's definitely true that there will be some sharks which will be more aggressive than others. But I don't think that means that rogue shark theory is true, because rogue shark theory says that they would target humans, whereas I think aggressiveness and personality stuff is very much a kind of artifact of the situation that the shark is in. So even the most aggressive shark, when it's just swimming along, it's not going to be attacking anything, it's just swimming along minding its own business. You might have an issue when a swimmer jumps in the water and accidentally jumps on top of an aggressive shark. Then the response might be different from that aggressive shark to a calm shark. But I think the point would be, if you jump on top of a shark, you're probably not going to have a particularly nice experience, regardless of the personality. But it's a really interesting point.
Yeah, it is really interesting. Before we move on to talk about coexistence, just briefly mention the sort of do-nothing approach. And that is basically when there's no safety management offered at all, but it is a beach that is frequented by people and is known to have sharks in the area or sharks moving through the area. The Eastern Cape in South Africa, a lot of beaches there don't have any kind of form of shark management unless there's sort of major surfing tournaments going on. And I think there'll be different reasons why people would opt to do nothing. It could be to do with costs, it could be they don't think it's worth it could be logistical problems, like you won't be able to put nets on every stretch of beach. The way the beach is will be I don't know what I want to say.
Unsuitable.
Yeah, that's it. You won't be able to put nets on every single beach. The way the beach is could be completely unsuitable for any form of safety management that currently exists. And I think there's nothing necessarily wrong with shark safe doing nothing, because I think with a lot of lethal control, as we said with the hunts, you're more trying to control the fear and the human side of it than actually the sharks. So you could sort of say education would be a form of sort of doing nothing, in the sense you've got nothing physically going on the beach, but if you're educating people of the risks and what they should do when they're in the water and not do, and where to go, where not to go, and kind of what to look out for, but also the kind of unlikeliness of encountering a shark, then that's fine. So I think the kind of do nothing approach more relates to there's no kind of physical thing happening, but there could be stuff happening behind the scenes, if that makes sense.
I think that could be very effective. I mean, that's been shown so much with conservation. As soon as you bring in education and just letting people know a bit more about the truth behind it, then things can change. I mean, obviously, yeah, some of those are quite maybe hard to get your head around as a viewer, listener, some of the lethal controls, because they are quite extreme towards sharks. Do we maybe want to talk about maybe from the non-lethal side, like what else is going on that's maybe a little bit more humane in some people's opinion?
Yeah, so the kind of most systematic and sustained example worldwide of a non-lethal shark safety management is the Shark Spotters program in Cape Town, which I am a huge fan of. I think they're absolutely awesome. Basically, it's kind of exactly what it says on the tin. A shark spotter sits at a high vantage point and looks out over the bay. And if they spot a shark, they alert the spotter on the beach, who raises a white flag and sets off an alarm. Cape Town is ideally suited for this kind of program because you have mountains adjacent to beaches, so you have this naturally high stance and big bays, so it does make this kind of program a lot easier to operate there. And they operate on a lot of major surfing and swimming beaches across the city. They have different colour flags as well for different levels of risk. So they have a green flag, which is good spotting conditions, black flag, which is poor spotting conditions. And if you've ever been to Cape Town, you'll definitely have seen the black flag. It is flying, I think, 80% of the time. The red flag means high shark risk. So this can mean different things. So it could either be a shark has been seen in the last hour but has now gone, but it has been there recently, so they put the red flag up. There are conditions in the bay or the area that are conducive with high shark activity. So for example, a whale carcass, or if they see large schools of fish swimming through. If 5 sharks have been spotted at one beach sort of nearby in one day, or kind of anywhere in the city, then they'd put the flag up because it sort of suggests there's lots of sharks in the area.
I like what you said there, anywhere in the city, just, chilling in a cafe shop. Yeah. Like, oh, great white flag. He's like just having a coffee. He's like, that's fine, I'm fine.
Leave me alone. If a shark spotted nearby is exhibiting hunting behaviours, or if they see a shark but it's far away or swimming away from the beach and not presenting a threat, then they wouldn't necessarily clear the water for that. They would just keep an eye on it. And then there's the white flag, which is the last one, which means that a shark has been spotted. It's accompanied with I think it's a military grade siren, and the water is completely cleared. And if you arrive at the beach, you are, you're not allowed in. You're strongly discouraged from going in the water.
I thought you were going to say it's accompanied by a military grade missile or something like
that. No, it's just a really loud siren. And if there's no flag, obviously that means that there's no spotter on duty. And it's just a great program because they are there on the beach, so you can go and speak to them if you're worried. They've got big posters up with all the information, and they've got these different flags, and you can kind of know what's going on.
And so there's a very nice variant of this program. I'm sure they're not affiliated, but it's a similar idea taking place in California and I think maybe Washington State, where without so many large mountains around, they're using drones. So there'll be a chap on the beach with a couple of drones and a load of battery packs, and he takes it up and zooms around all day looking for these big sharks in the water. And when he does see them, he'll alert people. And if he sees them actually going near surfers or swimmers, he'll hover over their heads and they'll know, oh, there's a drone. Ooh, I should probably get out of the water because there's probably a big shark.
Yeah, the Shark Spotters are also working on developing camera technology that would and they're using machine learning so that the computer would recognise what's a shark and what's not a shark, with the hope to kind of have shark spotters in areas where shark spotters wouldn't be able to work. So for example, on the East Coast where they're using lethal shark control, they don't have these high mountains for the shark spotter to sit on, so they need an alternative, and these sort of cameras technology coming through would hopefully be a really feasible alternative, but it's still in the works, so I don't have much more information on that.
But I think, I mean, that would definitely, I think for a lot of people, that would reassure them, just knowing that someone was there. It doesn't have to be lethal by any means. It's just knowing that someone is watching, I think. And there was another strategy, non-lethal strategy, that I really like the sound of. So it's what's called these shark-safe barriers. And so they're these eco-friendly, sort of shark-specific, I don't know how to describe them. They're basically designed to look like a kelp forest. But what they are is these they look like these long tubes that are designed to imitate a kelp forest, and they generate a strong magnetic field. So basically it's these rows of these vertical plastic tubes with magnets, and so it's kind of interfering with, like you're saying, Robi, with the sharks detecting using their head and kind of these electromagnetic sensors that they have. This interferes with that, and it's actually been quite successfully tested on bull and white sharks. So even when they've placed food on the other side of these barriers, the sharks haven't crossed it.
This sounds like something out of Star Trek.
Honestly, it's really, really bizarre looking. Literally, it's these plastic tubes. There's nothing stopping the sharks swimming through, but it's just interfering with their electromagnetic sensing. So I think that offers promise. It's still in the early stages, but promising.
I would love to just meet the researcher who woke up one morning and thought, I know, I'm going to use magnets on pipes along beaches to interfere with the shark's electroreception. Fantastic! That's amazing.
Yeah. Well, using electricity technology is something that has been used in the past for shark safety. So kind of other forms of non-lethal management include individual electronic devices. So something called Shark Shield was developed for scuba divers and also to minimise damage to fishing trawlers originally, but is now used by surfers and kayakers to deter sharks. And yeah, basically, as you guys have described, sharks have specialised receptors to detect weak electrical potentials generated by other animals or objects, and they use this to navigate and orient themselves and for hunting and locating prey. So sharks navigate through detecting electric fields produced by their bodies or water currents in their surroundings as they move through the Earth's electromagnetic field. And so electricity and electric repellent devices can be developed to be adversive to sharks, which is kind of the same technology. And this has been done on these like wider scales across beaches, as what you kind of just described, Emma, and also individually. I don't know anyone who uses these. I studied shark safety a little bit when I was in Cape Town, and I interviewed a bunch of people on the beach, and I think one guy said he knew someone who used one. So I don't think they're hugely popular, and I don't think people have that much confidence in them. But I also think there's an element of people who surf regularly aren't worried about sharks. But if you're someone who surfs in the UK all the time and then you go out to South Africa for the first time, you might be a bit more worried. So you might be interested in getting one. Again, it would probably just make you feel a bit better.
And if anyone's at all particularly interested in sharks and wants a cool shark fact, the electroreceptive receptors, which the sharks have one of the most fantastic names of any thing in the animal kingdom. They're called the ampullae of Lorenzini, and I think that's amazing. And one day I want to go out and discover a fish with new ampullae, and I want to call it the ampullae of Watkinson. So then we can have the ampullae of Lorenzini and the ampullae of Watkinson, and I think they'd go together really nicely.
I love that.
But I think that's actually my favourite thing. What makes sharks so cool to me is these electric kind of sensory systems that they've got just around the lateral lines of their bodies and their faces. I think that's amazing.
Yeah, and I like this sort of more science-based approach to how, okay, let's learn about the sharks and figure out how we can use that knowledge to work with them almost. And although it is sort of interfering in their sort of the natural way they use things, it's quite nice that we're going back to basics and thinking, okay, why don't we study these animals that we're scared of? And sort of another way we've done that is through their visual? That's not a word. visual. My goodness.
Visuals.
It's been a long lockdown.
Sort of another way we've done this is through their visual system. So they've developed specialised wetsuits that use colours and patterns to reduce the wearer's visibility to sharks, because sharks have quite poor colour vision, so you can almost camouflage yourself against the sea. And they also have monochrome wetsuits and sort of surfboard stickers that are monochrome to mimic dangerous marine organisms such as orcas or sea snakes, which is quite cool.
I'd quite like that. Pretend to be a sea snake.
Yeah,
You'd
exactly.
be good at it, dear. I think, again, I think Ocean Ramsey uses... I know I talk about her a lot because she's one of the people I know about most in kind of shark conservation, because she's very high profile on Instagram, is what I use. And she has these quite kind of sea snakey or orca-y, like almost crocodile-like wetsuits that she uses. And instead of using fins like a snorkel, she's got kind of flared things which look a little bit like a fish thing. So it's very cool, the kind of making us seem less interesting and less likely to pique a shark's curiosity is a really nice angle to take, I think, with this sort of kind of wildlife man-human coexistence, shall we say.
Yeah. And another option, which I think, Robi, you're going to like, is an exclusion net does exist. So there is a net that exists that does form a barrier to sharks. It is different to the shark nets I described earlier, which I know is a little bit confusing. And these are very rarely used. So the majority of, if you've ever been to a beach where there's shark nets, I think it's safe to assume that it was a lethal shark net. Unless you've been to Fishhook Beach in Cape Town, which has an exclusion net, and it extends only across the part of the bay. And basically the net is different in almost every conceivable way. The design is different, so it's much smaller gaps and it's diagonally crossed over instead of sort of a square pattern. So the gaps are much narrower, so a large animal wouldn't be able to get tangled. It's designed to minimise entanglement, and it also extends from the top of the sea to the seafloor across the whole water column, so it does literally form a barrier. You couldn't swim through it, neither could a shark.
See, that's what I thought a shark net was.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
same.
That's what I think. That's what I thought as well before I learnt. And although this does exist, as I said, it's not a sort of generally rolled out thing, and so it is likely that your shark nets that you've experienced were lethal shark nets. The really cool thing about the one in Fishhook, which as far as I know is one of the only ones in the world, I think there are a couple others, but I'm not sure where. It's removed every night and deployed each morning, and this is to minimise any marine life entanglement. Obviously it's designed to do that anyway, but something like a cormorant could get stuck in it, or smaller fish, and so they don't leave it out in the bay because they want to minimise that happening as much as possible. So it's only there during sort of swimming hours.
That's good. Although I guess you run the risk of a shark coming in at night and then getting trapped when they put the net back across in the morning.
It's quite a small gap, and you can sort of see in the gap. I don't think that would happen.
Yeah, I'm sure you'd notice if there was a bloody big shark just kind of paddling around with the kids. Oh, okay. I think we missed one there, chaps.
And they still have a shark spotter on that beach as well. So they have both, which is nice.
No, I hadn't realised that. I think I was quite ignorant, I guess, to the difference between exclusion nets and shark nets. So I'm glad you enlightened us on the difference. And I guess one last one I wanted to mention, just because it sounds really cool, is called a blimp. So basically what this is, it's kind of like an airship. So it's this kind of, it's an airship with a camera attached to it. So uses very little energy. It can fly for long periods of time.
We can show you a blimp now. There's one on the screen. There you go. That's a blimp. It's an unmanned kind of airship.
Looks really funky, doesn't it? But kind of like you were saying, I think, Kate, you were saying about using algorithms to detect if something is a shark or not. They're kind of implementing that, so it can just be flying all the time, detect sharks using these algorithms, and then just people feel a little bit safer knowing that there is this blimp flying around, continuously monitoring, and it's not something like a drone that would just run out of battery, because it's basically like an airship and it can just kind of almost continuously operate. So that was just
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool.
And then I guess closer to home, if you're here in the UK, if you wanted to actually get involved actively in shark conservation and monitoring, there's a really, really cool sort of citizen science project that's happening with the Shark Trust. And so what they are asking people to do is look for shark and skate eggs. So we were talking about this earlier, but like what they actually look like, these kind of look a bit like seaweed, I guess. They have various coiled, funky bits. And they're these leathery capsules where the embryo develops in the shark. But once they're empty, they wash up onto the beach. And so they're asking people to use their ID guides to try and identify them. And then that way they get a picture of how many sharks are breeding, what sharks are in UK waters. So if you find them, and they're really, really dry when you find them, but they say if you rehydrate them, they're really stretchy. And then you can look in the ID guides and be like, oh, that's from a catfish, or, yeah. So, cat shark, sorry.
Catfish a shark.
I was going to say cat shark, I did not mean catfish.
I think dogfish quite often do Little Mermaid's purses. They make a lot of those.
We love citizen science. That's
yes,
so cool.
we do love citizen science.
Big up citizen science.
So we kind of hope that we've given you a bit of a kind of a thoughtful reconsideration of what your kind of perception of sharks is. We kind of hope that you might reconsider your kind of preconceptions with this. And it really is, this entire argument, this debate is all about the fact that occasionally sharks do bite humans. And as I said earlier, if they didn't, we'd probably think they were the most beautiful animal in the sea, and we'd write poems about them the same way we did dolphins. Clearly, mitigating shark bites on the rare occasions that they do occur is of really good importance. And now we know, and this kind of field of shark research has only really happened in the 2000s and maybe the late 90s, the impact of having sharks in the ecosystems. They are the pillars of the ocean. They keep everything in check. A big thing which is being now discovered off the coast of California, with sharks having been mid-range sharks having been overfished and taken out, that actually the seas are being dominated by squid now. And this is a key example of how these kind of middle-level predators, in the absence of sharks, can completely take over an ecosystem. And there's also obviously the massive impact on people.
Yeah, shark bites' impact on people are beyond the individual bitten by the shark. Obviously, some shark bites are fatal, and there's absolutely no getting away from the fact that is tragic and awful. And non-fatal bites can still be life-altering, and so the impact on those individuals is, without question, huge. And in no way do we want to dilute that. Beyond the victim of the shark bites can create this sort of economy of fear, where people get scared to go to the water or go into the water or visit the beach. And this can really damage local economies and communities who rely on the beach or tourism for their livelihoods. Things like surf shops and beachside restaurants. If people don't come to the beach anymore, then these businesses really do suffer. So it is important for people to coexist with sharks, just as it is important for sharks. And we want to limit shark bites in order to not just limit lethal control of sharks, but limit these economic impacts on people. So really, shark conservation and human safety go hand in hand, and we should be working towards this coexistence for our own benefit as much as for the benefit of sharks.
And I think that really nicely brings us into quite a well-rounded conclusion, in that the three main points to take away from this, and we hope you do take this away from this podcast, is we need to reframe the language around shark bite incidents. We can't really afford to keep characterizing them in this way. Shark bite incidents over shark bite attacks, that sort of thing. A lot of the media needs to kind of change not just its language, but the style of content that they produce. So we need to see a shift from Valley of Death with the great whites in Guadalupe, and we need to see a shift from that, which is sensationalizing sharks and really perpetuating this negative image. We need to see a shift to a much more kind of fact, rooted in fact, but also rooted in coexistence. And of course, as is the case with all conservation, we need greater education and research on the importance of sharks within their ecosystem. I am fully convinced that we are only scratching the surface of the benefits that sharks bring to the oceans and to the planet as a whole. We need sharks because we need the oceans. We need the oceans. Without the oceans, we have nothing. So thank you very much for listening. It's been a really nice podcast. I've really enjoyed this one because it's something I feel very strongly about, and I know we all do as presenters. So yes, we will see you next time on the next episode. If you'd like to check us out, please, all our details are in the links below. Again, what do you think about sharks? Has it changed any of your views? Please feel free to get in touch with us on the comments. We do try and check them all and respond to any nice ecological questions. And we'd love to have a discussion about, what do you think the best solutions for shark conflict are? Do you think that maybe lethal management is the way? Would you like to see more drones involved? And if you'd like to see more of the stuff we put out, our website where everything goes up is www.biome/project.co.uk. If you'd like to see a bit more of us as presenters, because we're great and we do lots of fun things, our Instagrams are at Robi Watkinson Wildlife, at Emma Hodson Wildlife, and at Conservation Kate on Instagram. So we will see you next time, and thank you very much for listening. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.